Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second podcast of BESMO Empowerment Secrets. I'm Crystal Buddhist, CEO of Philo for Thought. And with me today as our moderator is Ana Pierato, St. John's University Hellenic Society President, and also Brand Ambassador for Philo for Thought. Before we begin, we're going to give a couple of shout outs, first to Columbia University and to Penn Club for the space and the technology that they've provided us today. A shout out to St. John's Hellenic Society, of course, because we're both, Anna and I, affiliated with the university, and to JLab for the use of their technology as well. Thank you so much. Anna, I'm passing you the mic.
Thank you for having me, Chris. So
Of course.
tell me a little bit about what your five pillars theory is.
So basically, there's a five-part empowerment formula that I borrowed permanently from Aristotle. So Aristotle in his collective works talks about five different aspects that human beings have to check in with themselves and make sure that they're fulfilled, right? And I use that for my classes and I summarize it into SIPPS, SIPs, right? So the first aspect is spiritual, and the second intellectual, the third is psychological, the fourth is physical, and the fifth is social. And so I've created those as five pillars or guideposts for us to follow as human beings when we're looking to, empower ourselves or see precisely what it is that we are looking for out of life, to make sure that we're following goals that aren't imposed upon us by other people, but that really are fulfilling for us.
So would you say that it in some capacity helps people build their interpersonal skills?
Yes, definitely. It helps with interpersonal skills, but it helps with a lot more. It helps with confidence boosting. It helps with setting priorities. It helps when life hits and everything can be overwhelming. But if we learn how to prioritize in a systematic and organic way by checking in with ourselves, it makes everything much more streamlined, accessible, and manageable.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about philosophy in a box.
Okay, so philosophy in the box actually is a concept that also derived from my many years of teaching. It's something that made the concept of reality versus illusion more accessible to my students, right? And so I integrated that with the five pillars aspects to be able to make the whole concept of Aristotle and his teachings more accessible and also more relevant to today's society, as opposed to being like some ethereal, extra, you know, philosopher that they have to just study. Because really the teachings of Aristotle are so pertinent to just the creation and processing of an organic means of living and getting through things, whether it's a challenge or a happy thing, whatever moment that you're trying to, uh, process or task you're trying to complete, Aristotle is really the key to these things.
So for someone who might have a lot of responsibilities, it seems pretty difficult to filter their life into five pillars,
Mm-hmm.
especially according to SIPs, as you mentioned. So
Mm-hmm.
you'd probably need to take baby steps in order to actually implement that into your life. Which pillar do you think is most important, and which would you attack first?
So this is a tricky question because really what you have to do is you have to look at each pillar as like a separate entity, but then also look at them as like one entity because they're all within you. So what I would do is check in with yourself internally, which is important, and check in with yourself externally, which is in some ways, not as important, but also we'll explain in a second. But internally, if you feel like spiritually, intellectually, or psychologically something is off with yourself, then the external stuff isn't going to work. So it's very important for you. And when I say spiritually, I don't mean like religiously, but you have to check in with yourself. You have to understand yourself enough to know what makes you light up in the morning. Like when you wake up in the morning, what makes you motivated enough to go do something. And it could be competing priorities. It could be, you know, you have your family and you have your friends and you have school. You're looking forward to doing some special project or your internship or whatever it is that you're, you know, so excited to do, right? But these are all things that we prioritize in some level or another. And it's important to actually engage these things in like a certain order so that you know what your top priority is. Okay. The secret here is really that you have to prioritize yourself. And I know it sounds selfish, but actually, it's not selfish to take care of yourself. It's kind of like that scenario that they tell us when you're in an airplane, you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself before helping the next person, right? So you have to allow yourself to breathe and have that spiritual, intellectual, and psychological breathing space before you can check in with other people socially, for example, right? So that's why for me the internal is the stuff that I put at the very top of the box, okay? And then the physical and social. Physical is important because you do have to take care of yourself, your health and everything. But there are people who have, for example, shortcomings or temporary, uh, you know, setbacks physically, but they're able to flourish because spiritually, intellectually, and psychologically, they're present, they're active, they're motivated to keep going, right? So for me, according to the theory that's developed here, um, the top priorities are spiritual, intellectual, psychological, and then the secondary ones are physical and social. And social has many connotations, whether it's interacting with people in person or interacting through social media, etc. So there's different, and obviously, as we develop as a community, the term social changes and expands a little bit more.
Right. And I do think that a lot of young adults tend to be swayed by a lot of external circumstances. And so they
Mm,
neglect the internal that they should be focusing on, like you mentioned.
right.
So it's very valuable information for young adults that are looking to improve themselves, both academically, professionally, but also socially. So I think that brings us into our next question, which I'm sure they would learn a lot, not only from the theory, but seeing someone who's put it into practice themselves. So, as a professional, an educator, a mentor, and CEO of Philo for Thought, how have you implemented SIPs into your own life?
Oh, I've been using SIPs undergrad, since undergrad. Yeah. Knowingly since undergrad and probably a little before that unknowingly because my grandparents kind of introduced me to Aristotle and all that just through daily mentoring and daily examples that they were giving me. So, but consciously, I know I was using it for sure in college uh, because I had a very fast track college career. I had all these opportunities to work and to integrate and to take on these responsibilities that other people my age weren't doing. And so it was a heavy course load, a heavy workload, a lot of family obligations, of course. And that actually also influenced the creation of philosophy in a box and that sort of sliding scale that I came up with as well.
That's really great to hear. And
Mm.
obviously, it did help you achieve a lot up until what you've done now. That doesn't mean that you won't achieve more after. So I do think that it's very valuable information for young adults, but also for other professionals who feel that maybe they've gotten sucked into work or other obligations that prevented them from focusing on themselves and really developing themselves first in order to better serve the community.
Sure, I'll tell you something. It's I don't know if I would use the term sucked in, but yeah, there are some times because of necessity. For example, there were a few years where I had to stop the progress of my doctorate because I had to prioritize my family because I had children and they were very young and you know, you have to prioritize. What are you going to do? Put your kids on the shelf? No, you have to take care of the kids. They're here. They need you 100%. And so it's important to allow yourself that time to breathe. It's important to have mentors and other resources that understand and are flexible enough for you to be able to have the life that you want. It's equally important to know when to let go of toxicity in your life, which we could talk about if a little more if we have time.
Right. I do think that's so important that you mention that, especially because growth, even though some may see it as continuous upwards, not necessarily it's always like that. Obviously, there are ups and downs with growing. There's no one set path. And I think the life pillars definitely work. Would you say that it would completely be an upwards trend? Do you think that there would still be ups and downs in someone's individual growth, even if they were following the life pillars?
So I'll tell you there are ups and downs, but it's important. It's like so we're Greek, right? So we could talk about a wave metaphor, right? The wave is not like constantly going up, otherwise we'd have floods all the time. And it's not constantly down, otherwise we'd have problems, right? So the tide is always turning, the tide is always changing. And so it's important to use the pillars not as like a static thing, but as something that's going to breathe and allow you to grow, right? So growth is constant change and life is constant change. It's just like the tide, it's constantly changing and turning. So there are going to be ebbs and flows. There are going to be really high points and really low points. But the idea is to be able to check in with yourself so that you know you're strong enough to get through whatever the low points are. You're strong enough because you've experienced the high points. You're strong enough because you've gotten through low points. You already know yourself, right? And so this is just basically a way of like reaffirming this constantly by checking in with yourself rather than depending on external factors. A lot of young people and even not so young people, they get caught up in social media and what's going on social media, and they start comparing and contrasting themselves with other people or with celebrities or whatever, and it's not healthy. The most important person to check in with and compare yourself to is in fact yourself.
Absolutely. I do think that's a really great point to make. So, obviously, the philosophy in a box and the life pillars that you mention here, there's one major takeaway from all of this, and that is personal development, obviously. And that does speak to the Fuel for Thought mission. Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
I mean, it's personal development and most of all, self-empowerment. We have a lot of organizations and initiatives across the globe that talk about empowering other people and empowering other people and building each other up. And they don't always succeed because the concept of depending on other people isn't always appealing to everyone. Um, but it's nice to know that there's a way to empower yourself, to just take the time to look inward and to empower yourself and to say, yes, I can do this. Or yes, this is going to slide down a little bit, and be a negative point, but I'm ready for this. Okay. And I'm going to build myself up. So basically, what's important that takes up a lot of time and space in our souls and in our hearts and our minds oftentimes is like trying to work around toxicity, trying to overcome toxicity. And really, what's important to do is to just let toxicity go. Just let it go. Look at it, be honest with yourself about whether or not this person or project or thing is a toxic element in your life, and then let it go. And that we could talk about more in another podcast probably, because it's very important. It's one of the most important things to ensuring success and to ensuring self-empowerment is to know how to let go of something. Okay, but for now, I think that's a good tie-in for this podcast. Another point, if we do have time, is to talk about perhaps the sliding scale. We have, as part of the philosophy in the box concept, we have the sliding scale that a few people have asked me about over the years. And basically, it's a system of being able to prioritize between one central item that you have to focus on for a moment in time. So let's say during the semester, the fall and spring, your priority might be school, or if you're about to graduate, it might be an internship or something else, some training or some application or something like that, and that takes up a central part of your focus. But you still have other demands on your time. For example, family, friends, you still have to, address all these other obligations that you had before this priority. So basically, what do? And so one of the things that I subscribe is to have that 70, 20, 20, 10 divide, which is on the publication. So basically, the 7, 20, 20, 10 allows people to have three priorities. One is the primary one, and the other two are secondary. And then the third one is like, on the to-do list. So you have like your to-do list of things that they're not so important in this moment on this semester, but they are important in general to you. So you retain them. Now, does that mean that the thing that's in the 10% box stays there forever? No, because we're human beings. And what your priority is right now, let's say your internship, is not constantly going to be there. That might slide into the background at some point, and you'll have the other three things as priorities. So while our priorities change, the scale also changes and shifts a little bit as well to allow that breathing space that I talked about at the beginning of our podcast.
Right, and I think that definitely speaks to the passages of life, which obviously the life pillars is reflective of that in the name. So,
yes. Okay. Did you have any questions that you wanted to add?
I don't think so. I think that was it.
Okay. All right, perfect. All right. Well, thank you, Anna, again for moderating, and thanks to everybody who's listening to the podcast, and also to our podcast sponsors, Columbia, Penn Club, St. John's Hellenic Society, and JLab.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.